Prologue.
While traveling the world, I've seen the true power of corruption. And I don't know what's worse. Living in exile in the wilderness. Fighting daily for survival against creatures from the Vale. Hordes of roaming giants and other monstrosities. Or being corralled into technical pens with all those other clueless souls. Their minds rotting away in a virtual world as they work themselves to death and their bodies wither. As an ambassador for the Holy City, I had the privilege to travel and spread our views. My head ached and my vision blurred as I watched the people of the large western cities walking around like zombies, blind to their surroundings, or sitting in virtual cafes, unwilling to leave their dystopian fantasy world of numbers. I saw quiet, poisonous greed spreading through the coastal megacities, and politicians willfully exploiting the people who elected them. My research led me to evidence that these cities were built as prisons for humanity. I found a legend about 6 beings of incredible power who fought alongside a race of sentient dragons to bring an end to humanity and its wars. These dragons evolved from a technological mishap. But as nature took its course, they came to be known as the emperors of our world. The 6 who fought alongside them were the first dragonkin, survivors, or products of the last great war, the one that led to the end of the world. With their knowledge, the 6 forced much of humanity into the big tech cities and trapped them there. Before the 6 disappeared, they destroyed all the formal governments and replaced them with the Pantheon, who are worshipped as gods and hold sole authority over the fate of humans on our continent. Dragons became the dominant race in the world. They in turn created a race of human-dragon hybrids based on the 6. These beings embodied the greed and thirst for power of their fire-breathing masters. But the dragons were divided by color, each type with its own needs and wants. And it was this lack of unity that led to the fall of the mighty dragon race. The red dragons, warlike in nature, craved battle and riches. The blue dragons preferred to live in harmony with the world's other creatures as they ruled over the balance. The green dragons wandered the globe, creating elaborate tunnels and cities beneath the earth, where they lived hermetic lives apart from all the other races. And the gold dragons stood atop them all. Their command over their race's innate abilities gave them access to tremendous energy and power. The golden dragons were able to subdue the others of their race, and they ruled over all dragons without challenge. But their thirst for power and knowledge led them to discover the Veil. The darkness of the Veil gave greater power to all dragons. But eventually, inevitably, they began falling to its addictive, corrupting energy. As the blight seeped through their bodies, the creatures lost their unique colors and came to be shrouded in shadowy black scales. Finally, a civil war broke out, and while the mighty creatures' attention was diverted, humankind seized the opportunity to retake their freedom. The infighting allowed humans to use their innate ingenuity and technological prowess to lay waste to the dragonkin's armor and reduce their overlords' numbers. And their powerful race of slave soldiers were absorbed into humanity's own armies. Finally, they hunted down and killed wounded and exhausted dragons, until over time the remaining emperors were driven into hiding. News from across the sea said that the western continent was unaffected by the Pantheon's rule but fell victim to breaches from the Veil and dragon attacks. Most of that information came from those hardened sailors and traders who braved the monster-infested seas for a living. They told me stories of giant sharks and squids attacking and even sinking steel ships, and of a colossal serpent that rules the oceans, though I have found no confirming evidence of such a creature. The police forces in the megacities are overwhelmed by gangs and unequipped to stop crime. And they too have gradually fallen to their own corruption. I am now seeing this same corruption growing within the Holy City. When I returned from my travels, I found blooded walls and a city plagued with murders. I shared my experiences with the then Pope and Knight Commander. But I could already see the effects of greed and power saturating the great halls of my beloved cathedrals, even our once bright and shining leader, with his bright blue eyes, had begun to dim and glaze over. And he ordered the massacre of a new human race who were living to themselves in the great lands to the northeast and the west. The war started because the Diamonds refused to pay homage to the Holy Father. But it spread like a plague, consuming the beautiful farmlands and countryside. Many young men died needlessly as those changed by the veil used their native connection to the mirrored realm to bring forth terrible magics. Greed turned to fear. And feeding on the chaos, fear transformed into a thirst for power. Our holy city had lost its way. But in a moment of clarity amidst a fight for life and death, one paladin, barely a man in age, fighting for the soul of our great empire, chose to cut the corruption off at the head. The young devout warrior of light, apprenticing under the Pope and Knight Commander, saw the atrocities of this crusade and turned his blade on his mentors. So, he brought an end to an unjust holy war waged against a people who might otherwise have been our friends, allies, and neighbors. Yet I fear that the rift that was formed will never be mended. As for the young knight himself, he paid the price for being a hero. His great power was sealed, and he was exiled to the priesthood. The changed people left the countryside and headed northeast, settling in an area far from the church's reach. I share my knowledge in the Holy Academy so that our future leaders can learn from the mistakes of the past, and so that this paladin's sacrifice will not have to happen again. Record of known history. Regis Cronround. Chronologer for the Pope.
Light reflected off the golden floors, illuminating the white halls of the main cathedral. Moving with a growing sense of urgency, Cardinal Aubrey worked his way to the temple gates. Emerging into the pitch darkness outside, he used the few pale, lit areas of the grounds to slip out of the compound. Then, full of fear but driven by duty and his young leader's mission, he headed into the bowels of the holy city. There the darkness was replaced by artificial light, as neon signs blinked welcome and brothel doors swung open and shut busily. In covering his head with his ornate crimson hood, he did little or nothing to hide his presence. On reaching the railway platform, the cardinal waited for a train to the city gates. He stood by himself, letting his eyes scan the area, and was startled by the loud ringing that preceded an announcement through the speakerphones.
The train to the southern gate is now arriving.
Weary city folk lined up in masses, impatient for their ride to the edge of the great city. With tremendous speed, the cold mechanical snake pulled to a stop, the screech of its brakes rattling the waiting area. The door opened and released a wave of sweaty, humid air pressure. A vigorous exchange of colliding bodies followed as the people on the platform rushed on board without allowing the arriving riders to exit. Sliding through the chaos, the cardinal found his way to a seat near the back of a car. He crossed his legs, showing the black pants under his robe, and tilted his head just low enough to conceal his eyes while he searched for threats. His arms lit up with goosebumps as he remembered with unease the voice he had heard in the cardinal chambers of the debate hall in the temple.
Allow your fear to consume you, and I will grant you power. Give yourself to my darkness, and I will embrace you with my shadows. Give me the blood of the untainted, and your desires will be fulfilled.
The soft, haunting words played over and over within his mind as Aubrey waited for the train to come to a stop and mulled over the arrangements he had made for his agents as they approached the trade city of Paul Vale. Thinking ahead, and not trusting the contact waiting for him, he had sent letters to prominent clans that he knew would act in self-interest. Sweat leaked from his palms as another bout of worry overcame him. Was he sending his men to their deaths for nothing? Sitting alone, trapped by ceremonial traditions and caked in makeup, a young woman waited for the rest of her life to be decided for her. As her mother dictated the path she would take, all she saw was imprisonment. Beautiful and stoic, a sacrifice to better her family, she struggled to control her emotions, unable to accept her fate. Sharp and bitter saliva coated her tongue. Finally, full of adrenaline, Lilith stood, found an exit, and stormed out of her ancestral home. Her mother's sharp but caring eyes followed the stubborn child. Lilith was the spitting image of her own youth, but now her eyes were beginning to show her age and experience. Flushed with anger and torn between her daughter's feelings and her own position as head of the clan, she stood proudly before the elders, weighing the options before her. Candles were mounted on each of the large beams that acted as pillars for the dark hall, and tiny flames danced feverishly atop them, their light flickering off the brick walls.
Get your daughter in check, or we will do it for you, Evelyn.
The threat burned her ears, prompting her to turn her head pointedly toward their source. She responded sharply to the tiny, sweaty, overfed man who she knew pined for her daughter's rights.
The deal is off. It seems I was hasty in arranging a marriage. My daughter is impulsive, but she has a point.
Turning abruptly to face the hall's exit, she let her flowing black hair smack the little red-haired elder in the face. Outside the hall, Evelyn tried to focus her eyes through the muddled sunlight. On catching sight of her daughter's white and gold dress, she pushed off lightly on her tired feet. Sitting by herself with her palm facing upwards, Lilith focused on gathering energy into her hand. As her breathing calmed, the air about the hall grew heavier, making it hard for those around her to breathe.
Lilith, stop. Please stop.
Evelyn yelled as the air tried to drown out her voice. Screaming out with internal energy, she broke through the thick wall of pressure. Hearing her mother's straining voice, Lilith closed her palm, dissipating the mass of shadowed energy in her hand, and turned to see her mother by her side, a tear running from one eye. She spoke with fear in her voice.
I want freedom, Mother. I want the freedom to make my own choices.
Evelyn looked at her headstrong daughter.
Lilith, if you ever listen to anything I say, remember this. There is a price for everything, even the freedom to live your life unbound. You must have the strength to take the reins of your fate and live with the consequences of your actions.
The two sat, each allowing the other to assess the future ahead of them.
Hurry up, you three.
The voice of the expedition leader echoed among the frost-coated walls of the underground facility.
Lower your voice, sir, please. We can hear movement above.
The malnourished guide could barely contain his emotions, and his body began to shake at the thought of the feral creatures roaming the land over the installation.
Oh, this way.
The other four followed closely, watching for signs of their location. Time dragged on as they descended further underground in search of leftover technology. Theodrix was tireless in his hunt for anything that would help him protect the city he founded to house his bloodline. An aftershock rumbled through the laboratory and former military base, setting off some old alarms. Hostile, agitating sounds filled the air, putting the group on guard, and penetrated the thin layer of earth above as they escalated, stirring the creatures up there. The mutated monstrosities stomped on the ground in an attempt to drown out the piercing sound.
Is there any way to turn that off?
The guide shook his head in confusion.
No choice, then. We need to hurry before those beasts trample through the ground.
Following Theodrix, the group dashed through the slick halls searching for clues to direct them to the storage area. The largest member of the expedition stopped abruptly, pivoting his feet and shifting his weight to halt his momentum. Heimeier's half-giant body gave him many advantages that he had learned to use as weapons. Now his blue eyes reflected off frost-covered glass.
Old man Theodrix. I think I found something.
Moving purposefully forward, Theodrix drew his silvered white hair back behind his shoulders. His crimson eyes lit up with emotion as he pushed his large companion out of the way.
Is there a way in? Where is it?
His calloused hands traced the door's surface for a way to unlock it. After a moment, the automated alert system died down and the door slid open. Theodrix entered the room beyond, followed by the others. There they found 6 empty pods. A 7th, still intact, sat humming next to them. As he approached, shadows in the tank resolved into the figure of a man floating in liquid. The subject's tanned, almost peanut buttery complexion drew his curiosity. What was this man doing here? Why was this the only tank left? Theodrix scanned the surfaces for identifying tags or marks. Then, looking to his right, he found a console still running. The dim screen read GOD, Global Oppression Directive. Taken aback by these words, he stood speechlessly as his team attempted to access the console.